Hello, grade 7s! Today we are going to read part 1 of the short story To Build a Fire by Jack London, so follow along. Day had broken cold and gray, exceedingly cold and gray, when the man turned aside from the main Yukon Trail and climbed the high earth bank. It was a clear day, and yet there seemed to be an intangible pall over the face of things, a subtle gloom that made the day dark, and that was due to the absence of the sun. This fact did not worry the man. He was used to a lack of sun. The man flung a look back along the way he had come. North and south, as far as the eye could see, it was unbroken white, save for a dark hair line that curved and twisted from the spruce-covered island to the south, and that curved and twisted away into the north, where it disappeared behind another spruce-covered island. This dark hairline was the trail, the main trail. But all this, the mysterious, far-fetching hairline trail, the absence of sun from the sky, the tremendous cold, and the strangeness and weirdness of it all, made no impression on the man. It was not because he was used to it. He was a newcomer to the land, a Chechaquo, and this was his first winter. The trouble with him was that he was without imagination. He was quick and alert in the things of life, but only in the things and not in the significances. 50 degrees below zero meant 80-odd degrees of frost. Such fact impressed him as being cold and uncomfortable, and that was all. It did not lead him to meditate upon man's frailty, able only to live within certain narrow limits of heat and cold. 50 degrees below zero stood for a bite of frost that hurt and that made be guarded against by the use of mittens, ear flaps, warm moccasins, and thick socks. 50 degrees below zero was to him just precisely 50 degrees below zero. That there should be anything more to it than was a thought that never entered his head. As he turned to go on, he spat speculatively. There was a sharp, explosive crackle that startled him. He spat again and again in the air before it could fall to the snow. The spittle crackled, and he knew that at 50 below, spittle crackled on the snow. But this spattle had crackled in the air. Undoubtedly, it was colder than 50 below. How much colder he did not know, but the temperature did not matter. He was bound for the old claim on the left fork of Henderson Creek, where the boys were already. He would be into camp by 6 o'clock, a bit after dark it was true, but the boys would be there. A fire would be going and a hot supper would be ready. He plunged in among the big spruce trees. The trail was faint. A foot of snow had fallen since the last sled had passed over, and he was glad he was without a sled, traveling late. In fact, he carried nothing but the lunch wrapped in the handkerchief. He was surprised, however, at the cold. It certainly was cold, he concluded, as he rubbed his numbed nose and cheekbones with his mittened hand. He was a warm, whiskered man, but the hair on his face did not protect the high cheekbones and the eager nose that thrust itself aggressively into the frosty air. At the man's heels trotted a dog, a big native husky, the proper wolf dog, gray-coated and without any visible or temperamental difference from its brother, the wild wolf. The animal was depressed by the tremendous cold. It knew that it was no time for traveling. Its instinct told it a truer tale than was told to the man by the man's judgment. In reality, it was not merely colder than 50 below zero. It was colder than 60 below, than 70 below. It was 75 below zero. It, the dog, experienced a menacing apprehension that subdued it and made it slink along at the man's heels, and that made it question eagerly every unwanted movement of the man, as if expecting him to go into a camp or seek shelter somewhere and build a fire. The dog had learned fire, and it wanted fire. The frozen moisture of its breathing had settled on its fur in a fine powder of frost. The man's red beard and mustache were likewise frosted, but more solidly, the deposit taking the form of ice and increasingly with every warm, moist breath he exhaled. Also, the man was chewing tobacco, and the muzzle of ice held his lips so rigidly that he was unable to clear his chin when he expelled the juice. The result was a crystal beard of the color and solidity of amber was increasing its length on his chin. If he fell down, it would shatter itself like glass into brittle fragments. He dropped down the bank to the frozen bed of a small stream. It was 10 o'clock. He was making 4 miles an hour, and he calculated that he would arrive at the Forks at 12:30. He decided to celebrate that event by eating his lunch there. The dog dropped in again at his heels with a tail drooping discouragement. In a month, no man had come up or down that silent creek. The man held steadily on. He continued monotonously to chew tobacco and to increase the length of his amber beard. Once in a while, the thought reiterated itself that it was very cold and that he had never experienced such cold. As he walked along, he rubbed his cheekbones and nose with the back of his mitted hand. He did this automatically, now and again changing hands. But rub as he would, the instant he stopped, his cheekbones went numb, and the following instant the end of his nose went numb. He was sure to frost his cheeks. He knew that, and experienced a pang of regret that he had not devised a nose strap of the sort Bud wore in cold snaps. But it didn't matter much, after all. What were frosted cheeks? A bit painful, that's all, but they were never serious. Empty as the man's mind was of thoughts, he was keenly observant, and he noticed the changes in the creek, the curves and the bends and the timber jams, and noise he sharply noted where he placed his feet. The creek, he knew, was frozen clear to the bottom. No creek could contain water in that Arctic winter, but he knew also that there were springs that bubbled out from the hillsides and ran along under the snow and on top of the ice of the creek. He knew that was the coldest snaps never froze in these springs, and he knew likewise their danger. There were traps. They hid pools of water under the snow that might be 3 inches deep or 3 feet. To get his feet wet in such a temperature meant trouble and danger. At the very least, it meant delay, for he would be forced to stop and build a fire, and under its protection to bare his feet while he dried his socks and moccasins. In the course of the next 2 hours, he came upon several similar traps, and once suspecting danger, he compelled the dog to go on in front. The dog did not want to go. It hung back until the man shoved it forward, and then it went quickly across the white, unbroken surface. Suddenly, it broke through, floundering to one side, and got away to firmer footing. It had wet its 4 feet and legs, and almost immediately that water had clung to it and turned to ice. It made quick efforts to lick the ice off its legs, then dropped down in the snow and began to bite at the ice that had formed between its toes. This was a matter of instinct. To permit the ice to remain would mean sore feet. It did not know this, but the man knew, having achieved a judgment on the subject, and he removed the mitten from his right hand and helped tear out the ice particles. He did not expose his fingers more than a minute, and was astonished at the swift numbness that smote them. It certainly was cold. At 12:30 to the minute, he arrived at the forks in the creek. He was pleased at the speed he had made. If he kept it up, he would certainly be with the boys by 6. He unbuttoned his jacket and shirt and drew forth his lunch. The action consumed no more than a quarter of a minute, yet in that brief moment the numbness laid hold on the exposed fingers. He did not put the mitten on, but instead struck the fingers a dozen sharp smashes against his leg. Then he sat down on the snow-covered log to eat. He tried to take a mouthful, but the ice muzzle prevented. He had forgotten to build a fire and thaw out. He chuckled at his foolishness, and then as he chuckled, he noticed the numbness creeping into the exposed fingers. He pulled the mitten on hurriedly and stood up. He was a bit frightened. He stamped up and down until the stinging returned into his feet. It certainly was cold, he thought. The man from the Sulphur Creek had spoken the truth in telling how cold it sometimes got in the country, and he had laughed at them at the time. That showed one must not be too sure of things. There was no mistake about it. It was cold. He strode up and down, stamping his feet and threshing his arms, until reassured by the returning warmth. Then he got out matches and proceeded to make a fire. From the undergrowth where high water of the previous spring had lodged a supply of seasoned twigs, he got firewood. Working carefully from a small beginning, he soon had a roaring fire over which he thawed the ice from his face, and in the protection of which he ate his biscuits. For the moment of the cold of the space was outwitted. The dog took satisfaction in the fire, stretching out close enough for warmth, far enough away to escape being singed. And we'll stop there for today. Thank you, grade 7s.